I think that, step one is addressing the collections that came in, that were collected from communities that were under great societal stress and pressure because of either colonization or white supremacy. Looking at the pathway, when I worked in San Diego, the museum I worked at in San Diego created a policy, all of us together, called the Colonial Pathways Policy. And the standard in museums for collections is, was it legal to collect this item when it came to the museum? And that is a problematic standard because law allowed many things 50 years ago or 100 years ago that we would never do today. And so what we looked at instead was, at the time that this item left its community of origin, did it leave in a context of consent and sort of mutual empowerment? And the way you find that out is you have to consult with the descendant communities, the communities from which these items left. The museum in San Diego, the Museum of Us, made a commitment to only hold items that were there with documented consent in this time, which means that consultation had to happen for almost everything in there with communities all around the world, many of which are indigenous. So I think, one part of that is museums really need to work from an ethical or a values-based proposition. That proposition of the minimum standard is informed consent is a reasonable one, and not from sort of a legalistic proposition, because the law is always the minimum, the sort of minimum standard. And so I think that's a place where I really apply sort of the values of religion or spirituality, making decisions from a moral or an ethical standpoint and applying them even in moments where it's very difficult or where the proposition means you might potentially lose control of 80% of the things that you are currently holding. So that's step number one. Step number two, we think about a lot in the museum that I'm working at, which is the ways in which artifacts, papers, artifacts of queerness were destroyed, have been destroyed consistently upon a person's death, often by their loved ones, often by their families, either because they wanted to protect that person's legacy, they didn't want to expose something about themselves, or they were uncomfortable with that part of this person's life. And so, there are big parts of our society, whether you're indigenous, whether you're African American, whether you're a member of a number of different communities whose artifacts and histories weren't considered valuable by dominant institutions. To recreate and to find those artifacts and those pathways is very difficult. So a lot of it requires, a colleague of mine, Margaret Middleton, talks about this concept of queer possibility. You're not going to have the standard of documentation and I guess sort of Western academic rigor around artifacts that express queerness in the past. And you have to open the possibility. And once you open the possibility, you can start seeing things in a very different light. And I think that to me is connected to concepts of religion and magic as well.
Absolutely.